All right, everyone, welcome back. Hope you are really enjoying the Executive Summit and learning a ton. Our next session is a series of, we're calling this the Roundtable discussion, and it's going to be a little bit different from the format we've used thus far. We are going to hear three conversation starter talks from Ameen, who was on the previous panel, Hussein Mehanna of Cruise, and Paul Vanderbohr of Prosus. They will be each speaking for 7 to 10 minutes. And then when their talks are concluded, we are going to open this up for just a broad roundtable discussion on the topics that they raised, as well as the topics that were previously raised. As we transition to our third speaker, we'll start moving attendees over into panelist mode so that everyone can more freely turn on video or participate via audio. And I don't really have any prepared questions, so I'm hoping that everyone else has lots of them. We are going to start off by having Ameen give his talk, which really focuses on building ML capability in a Greenfield environment at Orangetheory, which he alluded to earlier. Take it away, Ameen.
Thanks, Sam. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction for people who are just joining. My name's Ameen Kazerouni. I'm the Chief Analytics Officer at Orangetheory Fitness. I've had the pleasure of working in various different domains as a machine learning practitioner. I started in the healthcare space in graduate school and continued as a research scientist at Emory. I followed on to start, build, and head up the artificial intelligence and machine learning research and platforms at Zappos, which is an Amazon subsidiary focused on search, inventory management, personalization, sizing prediction, supply chain, the gamut of e-commerce and machine learning marriage. And now I'm here at Orangetheory Fitness as their chief analytics officer. It's a very exciting opportunity because, like Sam said, it's a greenfield environment. Orangetheory is a coach-inspired, science-backed, technology-tracked, high-intensity training exercise, and there's studios all over the world. What Orangetheory has is a very rich collection of data and information and buy-in, and they're ready to invest in that data and build an organization around putting that data to work. And that's my job, is to figure out how to lay down the foundations of a team that is going to be able to do that. So since this is meant to be a conversation starter, I'm going to kind of try and plant a few seeds that hopefully will draw some questions out of the panel and lead to some exciting conversation. So as I alluded to in the previous panel, I think the most important part of the foundations of a machine learning culture and a machine learning organization is a shared language. I'm a firm believer that the currency of an analytics organization is trust and not data, especially in a company where AI and ML is not the core product, where it's in a completely different domain. There are domain experts who have been doing the job for a very long time. And what you're doing with machine learning and analytics is putting the data to work to augment their capabilities, which means they need to trust what you're giving them. So there's a few inspirational quotes I dug up about language that was interesting to me because it was about spoken language, but I love how well it relates to information sharing and data analytics and machine learning, where a different language is a different vision of life, or the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And my favorite is from Matt Groening of The Simpsons. I know all those words, but that sentence makes no sense to me. And I think that kind of encapsulates this basic principle, is that at a company that has been diligent about collecting data, but is new to the machine learning and analytics environment, you'll often find that the data exists, but it's not been transformed into knowledge or information. There isn't a clear-cut set of metric hierarchy and definitions that allow us to speak to each other and share what our intentions are with the machine learning algorithm. What do we plan on optimizing? What is going into an objective function? And I think that building that hierarchy of metrics, measures, and targets where everyone's speaking the same language will often become the guardrails and guidelines in identifying where you can deploy analytics and machine learning solutions. So I think that is a pretty critical fundamental component of starting to lay down the foundations. And that's something that we are focused on heavily right now. And, in more familiar terms, it's strong data governance. The second kind of critical pillar, I think, is including the experts early. I think one mistake that we often make with machine learning is we build models and we trust in the accuracy and we measure the models based off the accuracy without actually including the domain experts who are going to be the consumers of the model, without including the product owners whose experiences that they've owned for a very long time is going to change because of these models. And one of the things we've done there is instituted a peer-reviewed dataset design process where before registering new features into a feature store, before registering new models into a model registry, we always sit down with the domain expert, with the product owner, and understand which part of a customer-facing or an internal-facing process or experience is going to change because of a machine learning model, and define a success criteria that is out in the real world and not just a function of the accuracy of the model. And I think that is very critical in not only making sure that you have a product, a machine learning product that holds true to the principles of the product that your company is selling or the product that your company is investing in, but it also helps drive adoption. One of the most difficult components of launching a machine learning organization in a company for the first time is always going to be adoption. Building the model, deploying the model, but how do you get people to use the model? How do you get people to trust the model? How do you inject it into processes that have been there and been there before you got there? So I think including the experts early and part of the design process is a critical component. The kind of third piece that I want to touch upon is build versus buy. Very often, it's a common debate that people get into deciding what component to buy versus what component to build. And I think there's pros and cons on both sides of the fence there. But I think it's important to sit down before you start and figure out what components do need to exist, whether you build or you buy them, right? Whether it's your data warehouse, whether it's your DAG orchestration, your ETL solution, your data engineering solutions, your CI/CD solution, not only for your ML models, but also for the APIs and infrastructure that is going to do inference. What kind of prediction service are you going to be using? Even if it's not a build discussion, what tools are you going to be investing in from an open source perspective? What frameworks are you going to leverage to drive an ML culture that you think works for you and your organization? How are you going to invest in performance monitoring? What are you going to do for your feature store? I think there are many components to ML ops and machine learning in production that over the last couple of years, people who've started investing in building models have run into during the model deployment step of the process, where they realize that identifying the problem, collecting the data, choosing the model, building the feature space, training the model, getting the accuracy you want is not enough, because you got to deploy this model and maintain it in production. And there's a whole new suite of solutions that you're going to need to invest in, and you don't want to be investing in those, without giving it due process and thought. So lastly, I think a piece that I want to touch on is hiring right. I think it is, and when I say hiring right, I mean, that's an obvious piece, it's hire the right team, but the way we're trying to do it at Orangetheory is being very deliberate about what we call the roles, what the progression in the roles look like, and what the importance of each role to the process is. And when I say role, I mean the phrase that the job description of a data scientist has been so conflated and mixed up and overused and overloaded that it can mean anything, honestly, at this point, as long as you're using data, right? And using some kind of piece of technology that has become part of the alphabet soup that is this field. So I think that it's important to be deliberate about what the different titles are. We've been very focused on what a machine learning scientist is versus what a machine learning engineer is versus what a data engineer is. Where do we just need traditional software engineers, business intelligence engineers, business intelligence analysts? And I think what that's resulted in is us understanding the data flow and the solution flow better while laying out the different people we need to build, to bring in to build that organization. More importantly than breaking down the job descriptions is to stop chasing after people who can do all of it. It's a lesson I learned the hard way in my previous career and previous jobs. And I think I want to make sure that I'm diligent about not doing that this time around, is that hire people who understand the other parts of the field, but are experts at their part of the field. It's really hard to find that unicorn that can do all of it. And it's not worth chasing after that person, in my opinion, while setting up a team. It's important to understand what areas you need experts in and then go find experts in those areas. So I think those are the kind of core components, building a shared language, including your domain experts up top, figuring out what components need, making build versus buy decisions, and hiring the right ensemble to execute on your ML vision. But that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ameen. All right, next up, I'd like to invite out Paul Vanderbohr, Senior Director of Data Science at Prosus. Welcome,
Hey,
Paul.
Sam. Hey, good evening. It's evening here. I'm calling from Europe. It's a little bit later. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. So I just want to, maybe introduce briefly myself and then Prosus and a couple of conversation starters, as you mentioned, Sam, also following on to Ameen. So, I'm currently part of Prosus, the Prosus Group. And before that, I spent a couple of years in consulting, did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon many years ago. And before that, had a short career in aerospace engineering. And ended up at Prosus after doing some work in consulting, as I mentioned, having also spent quite a bit of time trying to apply data science in a social good context. So I'm still part actually of a foundation called Data Science for Social Good, and now focus most of my time on basically building the AI team at Prosus. And just to 30 seconds on what Prosus is, only half jokingly, I often introduce it as it's the biggest tech company you've never heard of. So we're a basically consumer internet group, and one of the largest tech investors in the world, based out of Amsterdam, which is also where my team sits. And Prosus basically invests in tech companies in various areas of operation. One of them, a big focus area for us, is food delivery. So we have various brands and businesses in food delivery, which, for example, some of you might be based in Brazil, then you might know iFood, which is the market leader in food delivery there, or Swiggy in India. And each of these are large, very, very large businesses, each doing, tens of millions of food delivery orders and having their own right, big machine learning teams that we try to support from a sort of central function at Prosus. Another business area we spend a lot of time in is Edtech, so educational technology. So we have a couple of businesses there that in some cases we're more heavily invested in than others. So one of them, for example, you might know is Udemy or Codecademy or Brainly or Byju's, which is the biggest online education platform in India. And then we have a couple of businesses in fintech, a payments gateway, and a couple of credit providers. And then another big group of businesses in the classified space, which are basically platforms that enable people to trade secondhand goods. Particularly the OLX group is a big company there, operating in over 30 markets. So together in the group, we serve over 1.5 billion users with each of these different businesses combined. And my role at the central AI team is to basically figure out how can we help accelerate the use of AI for more and faster impact in each of these businesses. And And so I joined Prosus about 3 years ago, and which is when we decided that it was a good idea to basically build a team of experienced AI practitioners that could basically identify what the opportunities would be for next level AI applications in the various businesses, and that's what I've been doing since. And as you can imagine, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, as we've basically gone out and spoken to a lot of these founders and leadership teams and working with their data science teams on sort of changing and increasing the investment in AI, is thinking about how do we actually measure, the return on some of these investments, and that's something that I think, I wouldn't say has plagued the field, but it's definitely the challenge we've had for many years, trying to express the direct impact of a model, right? And like I think it's been said many times today, data scientist is part of a bigger team, right? So, and even the team that puts together a model that goes into production, that model is part of a full product experience. So how do you tag a value onto a specific fraud model or a specific content moderation model, or any of the other models that would be put into production? Yet, we spend quite a lot of time thinking about that because, these days, whether it's investments in machine learning platform teams or other types of resources required to, bring AI to the next level, these things get scrutinized just like any other, investment proposal that comes to the table at the level of product features or new market opportunities. And so we do need to have some kind of way to express and articulate the value of the AI efforts. And one of the things that we've been trying recently is actually at iFood, one of the businesses in Brazil, which does over 40 million food deliveries a month, has grown, really tremendously over the last couple of years in the number of employees, number of orders, and therefore also the machine learning use cases that we have, is basically try and create a dashboard that in a very, very specific and quantified way tells us what each of the models that are in production are contributing to specific business KPIs. And what that exercise has taught us is that, this is definitely possible for a subset of metrics. So let's say you take a fraud model, right? You actually know what the baseline is before you put that model into production, and you can measure the performance of that model, not just in, let's say, the traditional metrics like AUC or F1 scores or whatever. You actually want to also be able to measure this in terms of the business impact. So how much fraud was prevented? And so we track these kind of business metrics, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, monthly, depends on how often we can actually link it to the real business value, and track that for a subset of the models. And that's been sort of an experiment that we've been doing, and shows that this is possible, while at the same time also recognizing there's lots of machine learning work that is more of the enabling nature. So if you think about data enrichment models, or models that do sort of some content understanding, right? If you get lots of images, actually tens of millions of images that get uploaded to the platform, for example, on these secondhand sales platforms. Understanding those images and tagging them, there's lots of models running on that specific problem, and the output of those models are not going to contribute to specific, monthly active users metric or number of transactions or whatever, but it will enable all sorts of other models on the search side or recommendation side to work better. So those are the enabling category of models that we also track, but don't link to a specific, let's say, ROI metric. So, that's just one example. And obviously across the group, we've been trying to think through how do we better quantify the return on some of these investments, directly linked to models in some cases, but also sometimes, let's say, related to platform investments. So how much less time does it take for us to, basically go from beginning to end of putting a model into production? And at the same time, what we also started to think about is the types of ML use cases that we would work on. And somebody else mentioned a portfolio of models and thinking about them in terms of risk. And we also talk about a portfolio of models, but not so much in terms of risk, more in terms of application. So some models, let's say, for example, a recommender, right? That's something that is part of the existing product and helps that product become a little bit better. But in terms of the actual product experience, not much changes, right? So it's for the user, it becomes of course better, but nothing materially in the consumer flow changes. And then on the other end, you have, you know, machine learning models and product experiences that are entirely new, right? So as an example, you know, we sell secondhand cars, or we allow users to sell secondhand cars on our platform. Can we allow, or can we enable, you know, some kind of you know, AI-based techniques that would scan the car and automatically be able to infer, you know, what the state and condition of the car is, to make it, you know, easier to upload the car to the platform, but also give, you know, various other insights that weren't possible. That actually fundamentally changes the use of the product and has all sorts of product ramifications. And if you think about sort of the spectrum, having use cases that are, you know, basically doing what we do today a little bit better, and use cases that, you know, are riskier because we don't know if there's product market fit, if the user would like it, but actually change and in some way future proof, hopefully, the value that we have, you know, in our as a business towards our customers. And thinking about that sort of as a spectrum of portfolio of products, making sure you do the operational ones and the more innovative ones, is something we've been thinking about a lot. Because, you know, again, from an investment point of view, you want to make sure you don't just stay stuck in the current, let's say, future product as you have it today, but also work very closely on thinking about sort of a tech forward way of thinking and innovating on the product side. So those are the couple of things that I just wanted to throw out there, and you know, hope to have some questions and discussion with the panel on that later.
All right, thanks so much, Paul. Our next speaker will be Hussein Mehanna. Hussein is Vice President and Head of ML and AI at Cruise. Hussein?
Hello. Hi. How are you, Sam? Thank you for the introduction. Super excited to be here.
Absolutely. Take it away.
All righty. Well, super excited to be here with everyone. My name is Hussein, and as mentioned, I lead the AI teams at Cruise. We are a self-driving company, and maybe next slide, please. Yep. We are a self-driving company, and we're building an all-electric autonomous vehicle from the ground up. If you visit San Francisco, you might see some of our test cars roaming around. And next slide. And today, I would like to share with you this concept around AI native products. I've worked in different types of companies where they've leveraged AI, or while I was at Google Cloud, I worked with companies that are new to AI. And now at Cruise, I feel that there's this new category of AI native products. And I believe, my hypothesis is that the organizations that build these products may operate differently or slightly different than other traditional groups. Now, before I talk about the organization, I would like to take a few moments to explain what I mean by an AI native product. I mean products that just cannot exist, even in its simplest form, in its MVP or minimal viable product. They cannot exist without strong reliance on machine learning. So Alexa or chatbots, as an example, you can't imagine an MVP without machine learning. Autonomous vehicles is also the same thing. You can't imagine an autonomous vehicle MVP on the streets without significant amount of machine learning. Now, I just want to be clear, this is slightly different to maybe e-commerce, which has existed as a product and even grown without necessarily ML. But now, don't get me wrong, ML is extremely impactful there as an optimizer. And so I make a slight distinction between AI native products or products that leverage ML as a multiplier or optimizer. Now, I want to also clarify one thing. We've heard potentially this term of AI first products. I don't believe in that. And I really believe that, you know, AI first almost makes AI look like a hammer and everything becomes a nail. There might be products that flourish and succeed without needing AI. And if we inject AI into them, it becomes over-engineering. So to be clear, I don't mean AI native products as a hypish term, but more as a product that truly leverages AI. Now, here's my hypothesis, and this is the first audience I've ever shared this hypothesis with, and so I'm looking forward to your feedback and to debating it with you and see whether you relate to it or not. My hypothesis is that organizations that build AI native products actually almost operate like a neural network, and that these organizations will have to have some considerations that are different, like fluidity. So let me explain what I mean by that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I sort of simplified the organizational structure at Cruise from a 10,000 foot level, and I omitted some details that may not be necessary. But let me explain what I mean by the org looks like a neural network in itself. And when I talk here about layers, I'm not talking about hierarchical layers. I'm just talking about layers where there are groups of people combined with tools and perhaps machine learning. And each layer in that structure consumes information and then processes this information and produces new information that is relevant to the rest of the layers in the org. So let's take this example here. Perhaps our first layer is the autonomous vehicle itself, which we have hundreds of them roaming in the streets of San Francisco, collecting a lot of data. And also the technicians who are, for now, behind the wheel, and very soon we're not going to need them. Now, as anyone who's driven in San Francisco would know, just a short drive will very likely generate significant amount of interesting data for all these crazy maneuvers that drivers and pedestrians in San Francisco often do. And we call these events. And because of San Francisco, we're blessed with tremendous amounts of events. Now let's talk about that data that comes from these cars, these events. The next layer analyzes these events and tries to understand the ones that are interesting for us to look deeper into, the ones that have relevant data, the ones where our systems may not have operated in a nominal way, and so on. Previously, we used to have the next layer as only human beings analyzing these events. But it turned out that even in autonomous vehicles, companies, we can benefit from automation. So what you have here in the diagram is actually a layer of event analysis bots that are AI operated, and they try to prioritize and figure out the interesting events and make decisions as much as possible, handing over the more difficult ones to another layer of human event experts or analysis experts who then themselves would dig deeper. So now we've just went through 3 layers. I won't go through the entire sort of diagram here, but you can imagine that each layer is delivering information to the next one. The most important thing to notice here is that at the end, when you're done, you've actually trained a set of new models, you've tested them, you put them back on the road, and this cycle starts again and again. And what is also interesting is if you think of this as a forward pass, the backward pass is actually very important. So as an example, the event analysis experts can recognize that the bots are making specific mistakes, so they can go update or back propagate to that previous layer. Now, what is interesting is, I've worked in different companies, I've rarely seen a company or an organization entirely organized this way to process information and extract insights that make all their way to become a gradient into a machine learning model and then back into the live system and repeat this cycle again and again. And I think that is what I believe is unique about AI native companies, the fact that they're almost entirely structured to serve this cycle. Now, I want to clarify one thing. It is quite possible that a product within a company is itself AI native, like Alexa within Amazon. And so they probably have, I would hypothesize, they probably have a similar structure if they squint at their organizational structure. There's some more insights that I'd like to share with you. I hinted to the fact that automation is extremely important. And so actually some of our automation products at Cruise don't necessarily run on the car. In fact, they run in the cloud as these event analysis bots. We also have data generator bots and so on. And I found that this is actually very interesting. When I look at this, it just a little bit looks like the assembly line when the Ford company sort of invented it or optimized it. It was a huge revolution, but as the assembly line itself added more automation, it became more productive. I think what we're looking at here is sort of the assembly line that I hypothesize organizations will get involved in to produce these AI native products. I also want to share another insight. I think that managing such organizations is going to be challenging because just like at neural networks, there's a lot of innovation where you can adjust the layers of the neural network, you can add new layers, you can swap them, you can reconfigure them. This network architecture innovation has driven a lot of innovation in the past years, whether in vision or speech and so on. And I actually believe this organizational network has also gone through similar iteration and will continue to go through similar innovation. So what I'm showing you here is a very simplified version, but even Cruise itself has gone through multiple iterations. And even as I'm speaking right now, it will evolve. Part of it is because we are disrupting our own technology. We want to produce better models, better technology, push state of the art. And part of it is because sometimes the introduction of automation can shift what our teams can do and where they can focus their energy into more creative problems. And so my other hypothesis is that organizations that support AI native products, these organizations need fluidity. Their members need to realize that unlike prior organizations where the structure is sort of inflexible or more stable, actually the structure becomes a tool of innovation. Where you're working today may not be the same place where, you know, the team you're working on today may not be the same team you work on in the future. And this means also as leaders of such organizations, I believe we need to up-level our game, particularly around change management. We need to be extremely empathetic. We need to support our people, and we need to guide them and help them as these changes and these innovations, whether in organization or in technology, happen so that the organization quickly moves to the next step. All right, well, this is sort of my purview on this concept that I call AI native products. I would love to hear your thoughts through the discussion, and thank you very much, everyone.